At the age of 24, I was a spy in Russia for the Mossad, the formidable Israeli intelligence agency. Does this look like a spy? And you may ask why. I have to say, partly because of the adventure, but mostly because of what I learned at a young age. He who destroys one life destroys an entire world, but he who saves one life saves an entire world. This comes from the Talmud, which is a book of Jewish law. Though I'm going to talk about a particular group, you can really substitute any group, and the story remains the same. This is my story, and I'm going to take you back for context to the 1920s when Stalin, the leader of the former Soviet Union, basically eradicated all Jewish life. Jews were not allowed to practice their religion, study their culture, or their history. Communism didn't and still doesn't believe in religion. Everybody had to be the same, except for the Jews. There was anti Semitism then, and unfortunately, rampant anti Semitism today globally. The Jews actually had to have Jew stamped in their passport, unlike any other group. In the 1960s, when Israel became a strong enough country to survive for the Jewish people worldwide, the Jews of the Soviet Union wanted to emigrate to Israel. The minute that they asked permission and were denied, they were called Refuseniks. They immediately lost their jobs, some their homes, some even sent to prison. They basically I would say that renowned scientists and academicians were actually reduced to shoveling coal and sweeping floors because it was actually illegal not to work. They were not even allowed into universities. A group of these refuseniks decided that they were going to hijack a plane and emigrate to Israel. Now, they realized they weren't going to get away with it, but they wanted to draw attention to the west of their plight. Naturally, they were caught, sent to prison, hard labor, and thus began the movement, Save Soviet Jewry. Here's where I enter the picture. 1978, 24 years old. My cousin approaches me and asks me if I want to join him on a clandestine mission to the former Soviet Union under the auspices of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. We had to pose as a rich brother and sister. We had to travel on an organized tour, but we had to ditch the tour as often as possible so that we could meet up with those refuseniks that we had their addresses for. No one was allowed to know where we were going or what we were doing, not even my parents. Our task was really threefold. The first is that we needed to bring in books on Judaism, Hebrew, and Israel, all which were contraband. We had to sew them in the lining of our coats, put the coat over our arm as we passed through the security line, and not to go in the same line. The second is that we needed to meet these refuseniks as much as we possibly can to bring them items that they were able to sell on the black market because they had no money. Jeans, chewing gum, cigarettes, hot items at that time. The third is that we needed to meet as many Jews as possible and encourage them to want to emigrate to Israel because there really was no life for a Jew left in the former Soviet Union. Now, as it turned out, in 1966, the former premier, Alexei Kosygin, actually declared that Jews can emigrate only based upon reunification with family. So it was very important for us to get these addresses so that we were able to send these addresses to Israeli families and enable them to invite them. And that's how they were able to emigrate. Basically, in the 1970s, about 150,000 were able to emigrate, but it wasn't until the late 1980s, 1990s, where 1.6 million Jews actually emigrated, 1 million to Israel and 600,000 to the US and the rest of the world. So the journey begins. We get to Moscow, we get to the airport, we separate as instructed, coats over our arms. I walk through the security line, no problem. I'm sitting there watching my cousin, and I notice that the security officer in his line is patting down coats. I'm trying to get his attention to move to another line, but he wasn't looking my way. There I was, witnessing my cousin being taken out of line and disappearing. Here again, every emotion you can imagine: fear, anxiety, nervous. 24 years old, in the Moscow airport with contraband, and have no idea what happened to my cousin. God only knows how I had. What was I supposed to do, first of all? Should I continue this mission by myself, or should I turn around and go back to the United States without ever seeing my cousin again? What I wanted to say is that God only knows how I had the courage to actually remain in the airport. 3 grueling hours later, my cousin appears. Of course, none of the contraband that he brought. They took it all away. Interestingly enough, though, nobody even searched me. But we were definitely followed by the Soviet Secret Service, which was the KGB, the entire trip. Hotel rooms were all bugged. We had to write notes if we wanted to talk to each other or go outside. We were allowed to eat in one restaurant, sit at one table, and order only from 3 items off of a huge menu. We had to sit and witness lines of people waiting to buy apples, only to find empty store shelves. And you couldn't walk with more than 3 people down the street because it was considered a conspiracy. It's a very depressing time back then. Now, in order to find these refuseniks, we had to learn to read and write Russian in order to read maps. There was no Waze at that time. We had to write the address for the cab drivers in order to get where we wanted to go, but we couldn't write the exact address. We needed to find on the map streets close by so they wouldn't know exactly who we were visiting. Many of the refuseniks that we saw were very wary and nervous to even let us in their homes. But when they saw we were Americans, I spoke Hebrew, my cousin spoke German, they realized we weren't the Soviet KGB at that point. And though they were scared, they were so appreciative of what we were doing to try to help them, and of course with the items that we brought them to sell. And they served us vodka, and they were very hospitable. And though the language barrier was a bit difficult, we managed to communicate. One of the cities that we visited was Kishinev, and I was actually handed a microfilm of the history of the Jews of Kishinev, which was nowhere else to be found. I had to hide that on my body when I left, and upon my return, turned it right over to the Mossad. In Judaism, there's a very important value called tikkun olam, repairing the world. Each one of you can participate in tikkun olam without having to be a spy. For every group of oppressed people, there are organizations out there fighting to save them, but need your help. Reach out and do your part in repairing the world. And if you save one life, you may save the entire world. Thank you.